Good afternoon. Welcome to this afternoon's session on video conferencing. Just to remind you, please switch your mobiles off and your PDA sound and your laptop sound after the break. We are very lucky this afternoon to have, I think, three very important groups of people represented, and I think what comes out of this afternoon will be fairly key to see the future shape of video conferencing and the direction that we want to see people moving in. There is no doubt that people have been using video conferencing more and more, and people have been moving towards using IP video conferencing more and more. Now we have three major different systems in use: H323, Access Grid, VRVS. The issue that we have now is being able to allow users to easily get between these systems and to be able to work and interoperate, share data across and between these platforms. Without any more, I'd like to introduce Egon Verharen from SURFnet, and he's going to talk to us about the European face of video conferencing. Egon.
Okay, thank you, Steve. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen here, and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen back home, following us through the stream. Also, thank you, Steve, for giving already the conclusions of my presentation. So I'd like to move on to the next one. No, that's not totally true. Yes, I'm here to talk a little about the developments of video conferencing services in Europe. And the emphasis here is on the word services. We'll talk a little about all the other applications taking place in video conferencing, but especially the presentations after me go deeper into some of them. I initiated video conferencing at SURFnet a couple of years ago, which led to the present service that SURFnet is running. And just to give a little background why I am here talking about this subject to you this afternoon is that I'm coordinating lots of other groups and efforts internationally, especially in H323 conferencing. So what I have up here is some of the tasks I've been doing. I've been the chair of the task force stream, which looked into real-time multimedia applications, being video streaming and video conferencing. Now on the streaming side there's a follow-up. It's called TFNetcast, chaired by Dan Munster, sitting here in the front row. Video conferencing doesn't have a follow-up yet, although there's now a new working group or an initiative which is presented later this afternoon on voice over IP. So there is some follow-up. Besides giving an overview of the state of video conferencing services in Europe, I also like to describe some other developments. And those are developments that I feel Europe is lagging behind in the rest of the world. So that's also one of my messages is, yes, video conferencing is taking up. It's doing very well. However, there's more to be able to run full-fledged video conferencing services as part of your campus infrastructure. And there are organizations working on that, and I'm taking part from the European side. Usually, since I'm the only one, I'm doing some coordination between Europe and the United States, and I think that can be improved. Those are Internet 2 Working Group, FitMit VZ. There's an initial digital video initiative and a resulting video conferencing network, FIDE and FIDE.net, and even a large-scale video conferencing service at Internet 2, the Internet 2 Commons, which I'm part of the management team of. Okay, also a little going back. This is the third presentation in what I hope is a series of 4. I've been presenting on this subject at the last 2 Terraina meetings, so this is the third one. And just by showing you in a little while, I hope next year we can have the last one and video conferencing is solved. It's just an application like email and the web we use today. Why it's so important to look at this and why it's also important to do international coordination? Well, collaboration, of course, doesn't know boundaries. Although some of our universities are focusing on their own domain and on their own region, the case is more and more work is done internationally, and we have to support that. Also, there are more and more upcoming video streaming and especially video conferencing services. And enabled to connect to each other, we have to do some coordination, especially still, unfortunately, on interoperability, but also on the rules of connecting. And following from that, there are a number of shared interests. And one of the things I'd like to talk to you today about is especially that in how to connect to each other and using a uniform numbering scheme or dialing plan. And on the development side, if we do want to make video conferencing a standard application as part of our campus infrastructures, we have to get it in line with the rest of our applications and, for instance, the authentication and authorization services, and that's something on the middleware. Now, how we can do that is what I've been doing the last couple of years, and I hope more people will start doing it. That's join in task forces, take part in the international discussions going on, do some work, and luckily there's always some shared leader and membership that we can talk about. And of course, if you run a service or are you setting up services, having test beds, join us in connecting them. So what's the status of video conferencing services in Europe? And like I said, the emphasis here is on the word services. We specifically look at national and regional research and education network providing services to their constituency, to their end users. And that means that not only they have resources available for their end users to be used, but it has some guarantee. It's running a number of times, there's support, there's user help. Those all make up part of a really nice service and just not an application that one of the engineers at the NREN knows about. I've defined also that as part of a service, you have to have at least a gatekeeper or a call manager or a central component that people can register to and thereby can connect to the rest of the world or can be connected to from the rest of the world. What I've also seen is that most of our services help the end users in another way, and that is introducing the technology to the end users and thereby opening up a whole world of possibilities to those end users. Sometimes that come in the form of loaner programs, making equipment available to end users to use that and help them in setting them up. Here I'm, like I say, and I just want to emphasize this before we get into a discussion, why didn't you include that? I'm not talking about the individual uses of, for instance, the multicast video conferencing tools or the MBON tools as they're better known, or specifically the deployment of a number of access grid nodes. Luckily, our next speaker, Michael, will tell us all about that. So I made a series of pictures in which the growth of video conferencing services in Europe is shown. And like I said, this is the third presentation. This was about the state of video conferencing services run by national research networks in 2001. And this is a general overview. This is not exactly the correct dates at when services started, so it might be the case that you say, oh, but our service was up and running. Well, this is the knowledge I had when I made this presentation in 2001. And you see it's largely red. And if we look at 2003, you see some yellow coming in. And today, at 2003, we luckily have lots of greens. Well, the meaning of red, yellow, and green, of course, is red. We have no knowledge about any type of video conferencing service in that country, run by any of the national or regional network organizations. Yellow is there are some initiatives and people are setting up these things. And green is there really is an operational service. And just to show you again how the growth is, here largely red. So there were some particular initiatives, people doing individual video conferencing, but the regional and national research networks didn't have an operational services, but over the years we've seen that there's a substantial growth in these services. There are still some countries that are red, and that's why I said I hope this is the, well, not last, but the one before last presentation in this, in that I hope that next year I can have a 5-minute presentation showing one picture where everything is green. The way we want to do that is that the organizations that are now running services are also setting up trainings to their constituency. And last Sunday, Ted Hans from Internet2 and I organized a training session specifically focused and targeted at people wanting to set up video conferencing services. Now, if we can repeat that again sometime this year and next year, and thereby introducing video conferencing and how you set up services supporting video conferencing to the different regional networks, then we'll get a nice green picture. There's also the option that there is some kind of service, but we just don't know about. Now, I've been doing this for the last 5 years, and I'm pretty well connected in the video conferencing world. If a country is still yellow or red, and there are services, it means that something has been done completely not connected to the rest of the world. If that is the case, and you do want to be connected, or your country wants to have another color, please contact me. So this is a little overview of some of those services, and at the top just the main green countries are listed by now. There's a large difference in the size of the video conferencing services set up. I consider the top 3 at the moment in Europe, the network, the video conferencing service run by DFN, and luckily we have a presentation in this session about that video conferencing service. The services run by Ukerna in the UK, and the services run by Switch in Switzerland. And then there are lots of more services, very good services in their own country, but just smaller in the setup and the resources available. It's not that we're here in Europe are the only ones doing this. Of course, we have video conferencing services and networks in the other parts of the world, and the ones I've listed here are, for instance, VideNet, which is now recognized as the largest video conferencing network in the world. It started off in higher education and research, but now also the industry has recognized it as the largest world. Very specific services run at Internet2, the Internet2 Commons, and there are some regional video conferencing services, for instance, as run by ORNet in Ohio and surrounding states, and OneNet in Oklahoma. Canary in Canada is setting up video conferencing services. And what we see, it's moving down. Something that started off in the Western world now is being used at other parts in Latin America, especially CUDI in Mexico is setting up a good expertise center and service. On the other side of the world, we have the network run by ARNet. And video conferencing there is lagging behind on, for instance, the voice over IP installation. The H323 network in Australia, mainly used for voice over IP, handles about 20,000 calls a day. Almost all inter-university traffic in Australia is done over that H323 network. In the move, since video conferencing is an older application, from ISDN to IP, or H320, the standard for video conferencing over ISDN, to H323, the standard of video conferencing over IP, we see that there are already some services that are run in different countries, but now have to migrate and also be connected to the rest of the world. We know, for instance, of very large video conferencing networks in Malaysia and Thailand, something that we've never heard before. One of the reasons why they don't connect to us frequently over IP is that the whole country is connected to a couple of megabits lines, and then running high-quality video conferencing, of course, eats up a lot of their available bandwidth. But there are lots of plans of doing the migration, upgrading the research networks, and thereby connecting it to the rest of the video conferencing services over IP. South America and Africa are lagging behind. If I had to show a picture, then mostly the countries there would be red with maybe some yellow spots in it. There are some known sites, for instance, in Egypt, the American University in Cairo is doing lots of video conferencing. In South Africa, there are good sites. In Brazil, they're now setting up a service as in Chile. And things are shaping up, so we truly now become in a state where we can have worldwide video conferences. As, for instance, we've done already in the mega conferences, where we connect a couple of hundred endpoints in 67 countries divided over 5 continents. It is possible, but again, we're focusing here on stable services run by the networks. This is just a picture of the resources available and how things are scheduled, but I skipped this since there will be a whole presentation on it. What I do want to mention is that although I focus on the regional and national services, there are whole communities also running video conferencing services. And I do want to recognize the different communities in that. And this is just an example, for instance, from the Max Planck Institute. My friend Ulrich Swen presented on this lastly. A very good presentation for the H323 industry that were kind of surprised that their technology is used in such a large scale in higher education and research. But the Max Planck Gesellschaft and the Institute for Particle Physics is spread all over Europe, and they work very closely together with other physics communities across Europe and the States. And their work in, or at least coordinating the research work, is done largely by video conferencing. And in Germany, they are very heavy users of the video conferencing service of DFN. But there are other communities too. And especially, for instance, the physics community has been using different kind of video conferencing tools. They were the networks that, for instance, already deployed multicast and used multicast conferencing tools. And Michael will tell us something about developments in the access grid. Again, particularly a video conferencing service started from and used by the grid community. Just some statistics I will skip. Where the real challenge lies now is that those different communities and those different technologies being used can now be combined. While the services run by the national research networks are mostly based on H323, we do see other technologies used in other communities, and we want to combine the two. And the 3 dominant technologies are 323, and maybe some older H320 on ISDN, is multicast video conferencing tools, or known as the M-bone tools, and the access grid node. And how to combine them. And this is such a user group. The user group that the physics community is part of is using all these different kind of tools at all these different locations, and still they want to be in one video conference. Well, the alternatives, like I say, some M-bone tools, there are also other kinds of tools. One of the important resources in setting up a video conferencing services and making available those resources, for instance, for multi-point video conferencing, is how do you schedule it? And how do you guarantee the available ports to a user? Well, scheduling for the other systems has traditionally been done by the VRVS system, the Virtual Room Video Conferencing System, developed by Philippe Galvez of Caltech. And he's done most of his work at CERN. That's one of the alternatives. Without going into a religious debate of which video conferencing protocol actually is better, one of the conclusions, me being with my H323 hat on, the critique we sometimes hear on the other system is that they are just too complex to use at the moment. If we want to deploy this in a really large scale, meaning the hundreds of thousands of millions of users we have in our research and education network, is trying to make it as easy as possible for them to work. And that also includes often walking into a room, sitting down, starting to chat. Talk, that is. No, chat. So the different systems differ in that respect. Some picture of an access grid node, but again, I will skip that because Michael will tell us all about it. It's different in the sense that this is more focused on actual trying to establish some virtual presence in a large meeting instead of doing audio and video conferencing person to person. Just to give an overview of what if we work together and combine these video conferencing services into something great, I do want to say something about VDNet. VDNet started out as a testbed for exploring the possibilities of video conferencing. and more people doing video conferencing, and this is 323 based, more and more of the people that wanted to do that connected to each other and set up a general system by which they easily could connect to each other. Together with that, we also created a whole community of video conferencing experts talking to each other, providing services to their end users. Our goal is to provide video to every person on Earth. And maybe every person is a bit much, so we focus on every user in higher ed and research. The zones consist of universities, educational institutes, research institutes, also companies. For instance, a lot of the corporate members of Internet 2 are taking part in this video conferencing network, combining their video conferencing. And there's a public zone for people trying out this technology for the first time or not having the resources set them themselves and still wanted to be connected to the large network. We have a public zone. Although started in the United States, it's truly an international network with zones all over the world. We have more than 120 zones at the moment, and the estimated number of endpoints that can connect to this zone is 10,000 and more. When you start building such a large network and you want everyone to be able to connect to each other in a very easy way, and we've always looked at the telephone system, it should be as easy as picking up a telephone, dialing a number and getting a connection. Well, how do we do that? And one thing that we try to do is come up with what we call the global dialing scheme, and had a number of principles. First, it should be international, but still have the freedom of choice for local institutes. If they locally have their own numbering plan, it should be supported. But just for the coordination, we need to do something extra. If we want, it should be integratable with the telephone numbering plan. And therefore, if you just use real telephone numbers and you type them in, you should still get connection. Very important, this was not research. This was short-term development in trying to establish a service as soon as possible. So it had to be implemented directly by present gatekeeper technology. Of course, compatible with the existing networks that we knew. And we want it to be an open process. So we want not just a couple of engineers coming together and setting up this and then don't listen to any critique or any comments we want to do. And in this case, SURFnet, Egon, HCANet, and the University of North Carolina, which was running the main VideoNet service, came together and came up with a DAO plan. It's implemented now by VideoNet, Internet 2, and most of the green NRNs you saw in the picture before. What does it look like? Well, it's very simple. You have to get a way into the hierarchy of gatekeepers that we implemented. And we chose the most universal international access code to do that. And in this case, that was 00. Of course, the American immediately objected and said, well, we don't use 00. And we said, tough. The rest of the world does. Then we needed a way to forward the call setup, if you want to connect it, to some specific locations. And we had to find the final gatekeepers. But in a hierarchy, we aggregated them on a national level, especially since most national research networks were running video conferencing services. So we looked again at something that has been set up before, the ITU E164 numbering plan, and they have unique country codes. So for the Netherlands, for instance, it's 31. And after that, it's free. It's up to the different organizations implementing their own numbering schemes. In the Netherlands, we chose to follow the whole E164 telephone numbering scheme. So I have a zone prefix and my organizational prefix from the numbering block I got from my telephone company, which is 3023305. And then finally my end user number, which is 367. Since it's video conferencing, we also want to make sure that this is just for a short time. As soon as all our communication devices are computer and video based, then it's a lot easier to remember people calling by name than by number. And you can already count. I mean, we here have a number of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13 digits, which is hard to remember. While my email address is far easier to remember. Our prediction is that in the future, all call setup will be alphanumerical based. unless you still use some very old telephone technology. Okay, then you type in some numbers, but even there you can find the letters on the little blocks. So the alphanumerical dialing plan is what is defined, and this is now implemented by H323 vendors as part of H323 version 4. It's called the H323 URL. And you just do H323 : and then you can type in this, and there's a whole DNS-based implementation possible of how to find the correct gatekeeper. This is just a picture of GDS in action, but it's probably very hard to read. But sorry. Here we have the University of Swansea, someone at the University of Swansea, Steve's endpoint, trying to dial me somewhere in the Netherlands. And what happens when you type in the number is that it actually goes up the hierarchy by 00. It finds the country code, sends it off, look at the next prefix, finds the SURFnet gatekeeper, and finally the endpoint, and a call is set up. This is just telephone number routing, right? And we just implemented that for easy access in video conferencing. The part that is extra is that we actually built up a service, and we built up a fault-tolerant service, in that we have the world gatekeepers as 7 different machines in 4 countries divided over 3 continents. For this service not to run, 4 different countries, 4 different organizations have to be disconnected from the internet, and actually all 7 systems have to fail. Why you see double systems, there's a hot standby. If one of the systems fail itself, the hot standby takes over. If the whole university isn't reachable where these systems are, then the next system in the gatekeeper hierarchy at another continent takes over. Power of the internet. This has never happened. The system has been up and running since the beginning. Like I say, there was an organization where you can take part of. What's very important is that as part of this service, we also now provide tools to people who wanted to set up their own video conferencing services. And especially if you reach a large number and you still want to look up people to connect to them, then you need directory systems. And tools for setting up directories and maintaining them, that's now one of the large research areas that we have to come together. Like I say, Internet 2 is setting up such a system too, which provides that. And the great thing about it is that it's not only 3-to-3 based, but it's exactly one of those services that deploys gateways to the different technologies. It bridges 3-to-3 together with SIP, VRVS, and even some MPEG-2 streaming. Like I say, the most important thing in trying to integrate this in the campus infrastructures and trying to set up tools so we can reach all end users is building directories. The work on authentication and authorization and integration in campus infrastructures and the development of directory tools is done as part of VidMid, video middleware. Well, without going in too much detail on what is video middleware, its focus is on, at the bottom, trying to come up with tools for federated, secure video conferencing services. Federated means in our community that works together, but there are different boundaries in authentication and in trust. Secure in how can you make sure people not listening in, how can you make sure that the person that you're calling is actually the person that you want to call, or if a call comes in, you actually know who it is from. Ken Klingenstein in his keynote already pointed to this. The group working on that is called VidMid VC, and you are very welcome to participate in that. Especially now, if you set up video conferencing services and you wonder how to set up these tools, there are working groups. You don't have to start from scratch in inventing how to do this. There's already there, we're talking to the vendors in those groups, and you can just participate. In the interest of time, I will not go too deep into this. Skip some slides. Do want to mention that our work is not just focusing on higher education and research. The things that we did in building up this really large network and also developing directory tools for it was a world's first. And we knew that to enable to connect to the rest of the world, we had to make it into a standard. And that's exactly what's being done. The directory schemas that we've developed to support these video conferencing services are now standardized by the ITU, the same organization, Study Group 16, that standardized H323 itself. Also for SIP, the other communication protocol, we're doing the same. We're going to the ITF and say, well, this is a way how to describe endpoints and users, and that makes it easier to collect them and describe them in directory services. It's a standard that's being ratified next week at the ITU session, so we're doing a good work there. We have support of vendors. A couple of vendors in the next room have a presentation about their products. Those are the vendors that support us in actually building up these services and implementing the standards. I do want to mention that one of the things that you can actually do, and that's just the demo I want to end with, is if you do that and set up not only distributed video conferencing services and using the right directory tools and thereby setting up distributed directories, you can do funny stuff as actually now as you look up persons and you get back their telephone numbers and their street addresses, you also want to get back video conferencing information. So if you look for me, or well, why not look for Tyler? And I say, I can look in the different countries, but let's look in all countries. Oh, yeah, he probably doesn't find it then. Thank you. No. How do you get a Y on this keyboard? I'm not speaking Croatian. A Y? That one? Ah, thank you. It now goes off and it finds in the directory server all the endpoints registered to Tyler. Now, of course, our goal is to integrate these kind of directories with the enterprise directories, or at least link to them, so you can now also find video conferencing contact information in setting this up. You can look at the search interface for yourself. Go to www.vide.net and enter VideNet and all that you can do. Again, in conclusion, video conferencing is growing. Luckily, it's doing well. National research networks are setting up services that you can use as an end user, or that you can set up with the help if you haven't done so. We do provide training sessions if you're not used to that, and you can join. Join VideNet, use the global dialing scheme, take part in the working groups, and by that way we can make video conferencing actually a normal application like email or the web. Thank you.
Thank you, Egon. In the interest